and it's proud to be it's proud to be more embedded in the structures of power. And in fact, it measures its progress as a special group of people among Black folks, and even contends that Black progress itself for the whole people can be measured by the progress, the deeper and deeper embedding of that class of people within structures of power. Sharpton is actually not the most deeply embedded in the ruling class structures. He is, in fact, a New Jack, and more specifically, a New Jack preacher as a member of the Black misleadership class. His is perhaps the most illusionary of all. If we think of this political class as having an illusionary relationship to real power, although they are represented at all of these levels of structure of the ruling class. His presence is more illusional because it's coupled with and largely derived from his purported relationship with the first Black president of the United States, Barack Obama. That is a whole big part of Al Sharpton's new brand. Sharpton is in some ways a kind of cartoon version of Black power. He's an imaginary force drawn onto the organizational chart of the power structure by placing his cartoon right next to the Oval Office and next to the icon of the first Black president. And that illusion, this illusion of Sharpton's power, fits perfectly with the far larger illusion that a Black man and a Black family in the White House represents the fulfillment of Black people's dreams of holding actual power as a people. So we have the great iconic illusion of Black power and progress that is embodied in the presence of Barack Obama in the Big House, which is coupled with the cartoonish character of his Black preacher Rasputin, who was whispering in his ears in the corridors and the hallways and in the rooms of power. He has the president's ear, and that his advice is taken seriously. It is the very presence of Sharpton, the very public presence of Sharpton in those rooms and corridors of power that makes him the top gun in the Black misleadership class in terms of his public personality. That's why his name is on everybody's lips when they talk about, well, what is Black leadership going to do? His name comes out first because of his perceived proximity to power. And that's very, very similar to the position of Booker T. Washington back at the turn of the 20th century. And he solidified that position as being the most important Black man because he had the capability of getting closest physically even to white power. That position was solidified when President Teddy Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington to dinner. And they had that dinner, but Teddy Roosevelt caught so much flack from having the Negro to dinner that he withdrew the invitation after the dinner was over. But by then, in the minds of everybody, but especially Black people, Booker T. Washington had become the most important Black person in the country by virtue of having a meal with Teddy Roosevelt. Back then, the dinner with the president sealed the deal on Booker T's commitment to accommodate segregation and third-class citizenship for the Negro people. And it sealed his promise to beat down all dissent in Black America. Al Sharpton has made a similar deal. He's repeatedly stated that he will never, ever criticize this administration. But more than that, Sharpton has acted in the Black community as Barack Obama's pit bull, lashing out and attempting to tear a new one for everyone who puts forward any kind of critique of this administration. In return for that, Al Sharpton, although he's gotten thinner, has grown a lot fatter in his wallet. He's been given also a podium by the Democratic Party's TV network, MSNBC. But Sharpton is not really the king of all Negroes, as Booker T. Washington was. And that's because the Black misleadership class, as we said before, is so much bigger than it was in Booker T's day. There is a lot more competition for the title of King Negro, or most important Black person. Sharpton has in fact, however, earned the status of King Rat, and that's what we call him at Black Agenda Report. We don't call him King Rat just to insult him, although we do enjoy insulting Al Sharpton and other members of that class. We call him that because he actually is, in a real sense, the biggest snitch in Black America. And when I say snitch, I'm not talking about the snitching that he purportedly did against the mob, whether he actually did that or not. He's still here. I kind of doubt that story. I'm not talking about his attempts, even his attempts to gather information on the whereabouts and the supporters of Assata Shakur. And I am sure that he did that. What I mean is that it is extremely important for us to see and to view and to describe Al Sharpton's relationship with Barack Obama as the worst kind of snitchery. So we're not talking here about his personality as if this is a personality defect. We're not talking about Sharpton out of context. We're talking about Sharpton as the Rasputin, as the guy who hangs around Barack Obama and is whispering in his ear. We're talking about the very act of someone who claims to be a Black leader, in fact, claims to be part of the movement, hanging around with a president and whispering in his ear. Here is a man who huddles with the commander-in-chief of imperialism, who has a kill list, and he updates that kill list every Tuesday. And here is a man, Al Sharpton, who also hangs around with the top lawman in the country, Eric Holder. Al Sharpton gives the president, the one who has the kill list, and the chief prosecutor who puts people under the jail, puts them there for life, sometimes puts people on the path of execution, and certainly is responsible for killing so many Black folks on the street. He gives that person not just the time of day, but unspecified information when they have these intimate talks. That makes Sharpton the snitch of all snitches, and he deserves to be called the King Rat. It makes him uniquely evil and dangerous to us at this particular juncture in our history, when it is absolutely clear that any possibility of a rejuvenated Black mass movement hinges on our response to the criminal justice system, to the mechanisms of coercion that are employed by the state. And yet Al Sharpton is up there making nice and intimate with Eric Holder, who is at the top of that organizational chart of the mechanisms of state coercion, and with the kill list president. Not only that, not only does he socialize with these people, with the man, as we used to say, in broad daylight. He claims that this is to his credit and that this is one of the characteristics of a black leader. So we're not indulging in name calling when we call him the King Rat. It's about whether we are serious about building a movement that confronts the state, that confronts black mass incarceration, a movement that confronts nationwide gentrification, that confronts Wall Street's economic and political hegemony in the United States. We cannot be serious about building such a movement and then tolerating Al Sharpton's presence in it without complaint. Such a movement cannot exist with a Sharpton in it. The young people in Ferguson, Missouri, and in St. Louis who are going around saying F Al Sharpton are actually making the most articulate analysis of the situation. We should all be saying, fuck Al Sharpton. As long as Al Sharpton is discussed as if he has a place in our movement, then we won't have a movement that is worthy of the name. And here's the reason, and it goes way beyond Al Sharpton's snitchery. Sharpton's job is also, maybe primarily, to convey legitimacy to President Obama, legitimacy to the Democratic Party, and legitimacy among black people to the whole oligarchic system, legitimacy to the rule of the rich. This is his main function. His presence in the White House and his whole favored status is meant to tell black people that they have friends in the ruling class. And if they just press those right buttons that are located somewhere that only he knows, in the White House and in the Justice Department, if they just press those right buttons, then the system will correct itself. And there won't be any need to organize outside of the Democratic Party. There's no need to go beyond casting a vote every 2 or 4 or 6 years. And there's no need to struggle to bring the crisis that affects our people to a head so that it also affects the reading structures. All of that is unnecessary if there are buttons somewhere to push, and Al Sharpton and his ilk know where those buttons are. That message comes from a man who's earned his reputation in the streets, but is now snitching at the highest echelons of the state. That's why Al Sharpton represents a special kind of danger to the emergence of a new movement that all of us are talking about in light of the events in Ferguson and elsewhere. Now, that does not mean that Al Sharpton is inherently the most dangerous member of the Black misleadership class. He is a special kind of danger, but he has plenty of company. There are deep and institutionalized threats to the emergence of a real mass movement for social change in the United States, and specifically a mass movement of Black people for social change in the United States. I want to now return to Booker T and, of course, to W.E.B. Du Bois. Booker T's job was seminal. His role was foundational in terms of positioning the ancestors of the current Black misleadership class where they are situated today. When Booker T made his deal with the devil, and that was back in the 1890s, Black Reconstruction was in its last gasps. A reign of terror that began, well, of course, slavery was itself a reign of terror, but the reign of terror that we mark beginning with the end of the Civil War, and a reign of terror that actually never stopped, had snuffed out Black citizenship rights in the South during that period that we know as Reconstruction. When Booker T. Washington gave his historic speech, the one that catapulted him to national prominence and finally to the top Negro position, when he gave that at the Atlanta Exposition, and that's a big business and trade event that happened in 1896, there was 1895, yes, thank you. There was at that point only one black congressman standing. He was from Wilmington, North Carolina. 3 years after Booker T's speech, armed racists staged a military coup, armed military assault on Wilmington, killed possibly hundreds of people, and that was the end. That was the end of the last black congressman of that period. Booker T. Washington made his deal with Northern capital and also with Southern capital. They were all gathered in Atlanta, Georgia that year to start a new beginning for the New South. And for them, a new beginning meant rich white people from the North clasping hands with rich white people from the South and agreeing on what the future is going to look like. Booker T promised to go along with the subservient social and economic and political status of black folks, and he promised that that there would be peace meaning black folks not raising any hell. There would be peace for a generation or two. In fact, it was an open-ended promise, as long as it takes, but certainly for the rest of his life. In return, Booker T and his Tuskegee machine, it actually was a network of folks that extended way beyond Tuskegee Institute, but people called it the Tuskegee machine. They got protection from the ongoing reign of terror, and more importantly, they got lots of money. And Booker T got recognition as the most important, maybe the only important black person of his era. In a larger sense, Booker T's mission was to discredit black Reconstruction, which was going down in flames, literally, as he was giving his speech at the Atlanta Exposition. He was to discredit those decades in which at least some black people in some parts of the South, there was never a Reconstruction that extended throughout the South, but in some parts of the South, some black folks got to participate in democracy and got to institute some real reforms, especially in public education. White elites from the North and from the South reached a consensus that Reconstruction had been a failure. In fact, more to the point, they reached a consensus that it was a good thing that they had crushed Reconstruction in order to clear the way so that the white nation could get on with the business of becoming a full-fledged member of that European club of imperial powers. And Teddy Roosevelt, in fact, decked out all of the U.S. Navy early in his presidency, painted all the ships white, even though that's a very stupid thing to paint a battleship, because it makes it easier to hit if it's white standing out against the blue. But he painted the U.S. fleet white and advertised it as the Great White Fleet as he sailed it around the world. And that was his symbolic way of saying that the United States was going to take care of the destiny of the white race and therefore civilization in the world. And Teddy Roosevelt spoke a great deal about that. I don't know if that was the subject when he had his dinner conversation with Booker T or not. But that was what Teddy Roosevelt was projecting in terms of the new U.S. Position in the world. And black folks had no role in that. The business of the nation included, of course, gaining full membership in the European Club, and therefore the rulers needed a black person to affirm that Reconstruction was dead and that black people would not contest the loss of their citizenship rights. Booker T stepped forward and he said, I am the man to do that. He said that the Negro did not aspire to social equality. He said that the Negro only wanted to learn just enough to do the jobs that the white folks offered, and maybe enough to create some small, non-threatening businesses and farms, and that they would not interfere with white folks' development and who ruled the country. Booker T said that black people should cast down their buckets where they stand. And I'm sure all of you have heard that phrase, but it's very seldom explained. What the hell did he mean, cast down your buckets where you stand? Well, it was understood quite clearly among the white folks to whom it was directed at the time. By that, he meant that black people should accept the newly imposed racial and economic order and make alliances with the white powers that be, the people who actually ruled on the ground on which black people stood. Booker T counseled against blacks making common cause with white populists, an alliance that was at any rate breaking down anyway, although that alliance was still in effect when Booker made that important speech in Atlanta. That alliance was still in effect in North Carolina. Booker T was actually condemning the Wilmington alliance of black Republicans and white populists to death with this speech. It was quite a malicious speech in that kind of sense. In short, Booker T advocated surrender. And for that, he was rewarded with money. He got a degree of patronage at black-oriented, but always white-led and white-funded colleges. And of course, he got that dinner with the president. He became the king of the Negroes. He used that position to place his followers, those who collaborated with him, in advantageous positions, and to chase dissidents who insisted that black folks should fight for equal social rights, to chase them out of jobs wherever you could find them. Booker T, in short, was a pit bull for white power, just as Al Sharpton is a pit bull for the Democratic Party. W.E.B. Du Bois and others formed the Niagara movement, which is often referred to as the predecessor of the NAACP. That was formed as a counter to Booker T. Washington's accommodationism. And of course, Du Bois wrote the definitive work on Black Reconstruction. But Booker T had the full weight of white capital behind him. And he, because of having the full weight of white capital, dominated the black discussion, especially in the South. And Booker T would rant and rave about those Northern Negroes who were bringing in these alien ideas, and how Southern black folks didn't want to have no truck with that kind of talk. In other words, Booker T was talking about outside agitators, even if these black folks were actually from the South and maybe just got a degree somewhere else or ran up north and returned to do some fighting. Booker T was a pit bull for white supremacy. It is impossible, I think, to overstate the impact of Booker T. Washington's capitulation to white supremacy and how it sapped and warped black politics from within, way past his death. That his impact was strong and lasting one for 3 generations. He provided the ideological basis for the black accommodationist class. That's another way of saying misleadership class, for the black accommodationist class of his day, which became a dead weight that weakened the entire black polity and marginalized progressive forces, especially in the South, for a very, very long time. Although scholars and some activists knew of Du Bois's monumental work on Black Reconstruction, it was not part of the common black conversation. It was effectively suppressed and marginalized with great help from Booker T. Booker T had succeeded in helping white folks bury Reconstruction, or at least discredit Reconstruction. And that was key. That was a great part of his job. When I was in grade school, and even when I was in high school, the history books taught us that Reconstruction was a time when black lawmakers got drunk and ate fried chicken and stole public funds as they purported to run Southern governments. It would take a mass movement in the 60s to correct the popular history of Reconstruction. It would take the end of legal apartheid before we, that is just common black folks, included Reconstruction in our normal political conversations. It may not seem like that now. It may not seem like that to you because you have gotten an education that had the benefit of the 60s. But during my time as a youth, Reconstruction, as Dubois described it, as it actually existed, was unknown. It was a non-entity. And we had to reconstruct, for popular purposes, Reconstruction as we tried to reconstruct society in the 1960s. So it took a mass movement to correct the popular view of one of the most important times in black history. But the fact that black history, some facts became popularly known, some pieces were put in their proper place, did not finish off the black misleadership class. In fact, the 60s provided a new beginning for a new accommodationist class, because the end of official apartheid allowed a segment of black folks to enter business and government, and especially to enter the Democratic Party. And they entered those sectors of government and the political establishment in record numbers. In short order, they pledged allegiance to the system, and they reaffirmed their Americanness, and they consolidated themselves as a class, as the heirs of the mass struggle. That is, that this mass struggle occurred just so they could get into positions of prominence in government and in business and the Democratic Party. That was the success of the mass movement, that they were the success story. They, of course, had what they wanted. They had gotten what they needed from the movement. And as soon as they possibly could, they shut the movement down. And they did it quite deliberately and methodically and with breathtaking speed. And of course, they were helped in this project by the US police state, which mowed down, moved aside, and imprisoned the black left, to put it in a nutshell. I'm not going to examine the full scope of the black political class's behavior over the last 40 years. I'm not going to talk about the rise of chocolate cities and the reasons that the window is now closing on chocolate cities. There's enough material there for a whole series of 12 or 13 lectures. Instead, I'm going to talk about just a few, some of the more recent betrayals by this class that I think are emblematic of their behavior. Betrayals in recent history that define the black misleadership class in the age of Obama, the age that we live in right now. The current black political class is, as I said, also an accommodationist class. That is, they are wedded in fundamental ways to the continuation of the status quo that created them and gave them certain privileges. They're accommodated to the rule of the rich, and they will not tamper with capitalism. They are accommodated to US imperialism, and they care more about US prestige than the fact that the United States has caused the death, for example, of 6 million Congolese. US prestige is more important to them than that because they feel that they share in US prestige. They are accommodated to mass Black incarceration, and they have cooperated in sending millions of Black people to prison and to execution and to death in the streets. And I'm going to give you an example of how that collaboration is direct rather, and irrefutable. They are absolutely accommodated to the US alliance with Israel, which means that they are accommodated to the idea of endless war. They are actually, in some ways, more accommodationist than Booker T's crowd was 100 years ago, because the 60s movement allowed them to become more deeply embedded in US ruling class structures. We only have to examine, I think, to make these points clear, just a few votes by the Congressional Black Caucus, and I think they will prove the points. I don't think we have to talk about Mayor Nutter and all the other perpetrators of atrocities. The Congressional Black Caucus is a good example because Black folks numerically are well represented in the US Congress and come from all parts of the country. And they're all Democrats, as most Black political activity occurs within the Democratic Party. So if we want to look at how the Black misleadership class behaves, the best way to do that would be to look at the Congressional Black Caucus, and especially under Obama. In 2011, President Obama led NATO, he says from behind, but the assault could not have possibly occurred without the United States, led NATO into an armed attack against Africa with a 6-month bombing campaign against Libya, a country that had not in any way provoked the United States. During that bombing campaign, on the ground, the forces, the jihadist forces that the United States backed, conducted an ethnic cleansing campaign against Black Libyans, not just against sub-Saharan Africans who were migrant workers in Libya, but against Black Libyans who were indigenous to the country, and cleared them out of the areas in which the jihadists were dominant. Killed thousands, we'll never know how many, but that didn't bother President Obama, the son of Africa. They, of course, murdered Muammar Gaddafi, and with that murder and with that invasion, they destroyed any hope that the African Union would become a force for independent development of Africa. Libya has provided much of the funds that would have made that possible, or that the AU would be an independent political or military force in Africa. All that went up in smoke behind this United States bombing. The bombing had already gone on for a number of months, and in August of 2011, Congressman Dennis Kucinich and others introduced a bill in Congress that called for an end to the bombing. Half of the Congressional Black Caucus voted to continue the bombing of Libya, voted to continue that air assault and the atrocities on the ground in Africa. That is an example of their behavior when it comes not just to foreign policy, but to policy in Africa. In August of this year, as Israel had begun its assault against Gaza, the whole US House of Representatives voted unanimously to give Israel a blank check in Gaza. Unanimously means that the Congressional Black Caucus was also unanimous in giving Israel a blank check. There was no dissent. No one registered any dissent before the bill was voted on or afterwards. And that includes Barbara Lee, who was the one congressperson who voted against the invasion of Afghanistan. Clearly, that's not the same Barbara Lee that sits in office now. In June of this year, a white congressman from Florida named Alan Grayson, introduced an amendment that would have stopped the Pentagon's transfer of billions of dollars. I think the figure is $5 billion so far. Stop the transfer of weapons and military gear to local and state and county police departments. The Congressional Black Caucus was there for that vote. Everybody was present. In that vote, there are 40 members of the Congressional Black Caucus who can vote on the House floor. The delegates from DC and from the U.S. Virgin Islands cannot vote on the House floor. But 40 of them can vote. And of those 40, 27 voted against the Grayson Amendment. That is, they voted to allow the Pentagon to continue their transfers of gear, of tanks, and of weapons to local police departments. 5 Black congresspersons abstained, which means they didn't give a shit whether the Pentagon continued to transfer those weapons. And only 8 voted to end the Pentagon transfers. That's 8 out of 40. That means that 4 out of 5 of the Congressional Black Caucus voted for continued militarization of local police. That means that Ferguson was financed by the Congressional Black Caucus, that the Congressional Black Caucus is as responsible as anybody for Ferguson past, and for Ferguson's in the future. I don't think that you can get any more definitive about the nature of the Congressional Black Caucus domestically than that vote. Of course, that was in June. Ferguson had not happened. There was not much of a media covering anything anymore. So they thought they were voting in the dark. And once Ferguson happened and people pulled out the roll call votes and called attention to the Congressional Black Caucus's behavior, they all acted as if, well, they didn't mean to do it. They were not thinking. They were thinking. They were consistent, in fact, with the current behavior, especially in the age of Obama, of this Black misleadership class. Now, there are many more examples. I think that these 3 will do. It shows that we must have internal struggle in Black America and the strong and sustained political internal struggle if we are to forge a mass movement for social transformation and a mass movement for peace. This is not unique to Black America. It's not some special burden that Black Americans bear. The struggles in Africa, and in fact struggles everywhere, that people are throwing off the yoke of the rule of the rich and the white. Those struggles have all faced the same dilemma. The Mau Mau in Kenya had to wade through, that is killed, thousands of Africans just to get a shot at a couple of hundred European white settlers. It will be the same for us as well. So we better get used to it. Power to the people. And I believe I'm supposed to ask questions. Is that right? Or comments? Or happy birthday? And someone else ought to point out the question. Yes. Because I don't want to look like I'm favoring anybody. So that's a selfish adjustment.
Public education today. The differences between this leadership class and the discussion that needs to be had. We need leadership around this issue. There's fighting for just to keep public education where people live and where they progress live. We need to win what we really need in our communities. It seems like education would be a key issue around which to organize. I'm just wondering what your perceptions are leadership in public education with relation to leadership in the African American.
Yeah, I talk often on this and very long, and that's because Black Agenda Report Black Commentator, the predecessor to Black Agenda Report, our first issue and many issues afterward looked into. I think we did some really foundational work on what's been happening with public education from the political aspect. It's always been a mantra in Black America that education will solve our problems. I don't know that that's true. In fact, I know it's not true, but it has been a mantra. The corporate right, especially, has been keen to drive a wedge between unions and Black folks. And that was a tall order, because study after study has shown that there is a hierarchy in terms of which ethnicities and genders support unionization. At the top of the hierarchy is Black women, most in favor of unions. Second is Black men. Next is Hispanic women. After that, Hispanic men. After them, white women. And at the bottom of the rung are white men in terms of support for unions. And isn't it something that the group that is at the bottom of the rung, the group that is least in favor of unions, head most of the unions? But anyway, it's long been known that Blacks were heavily in favor of unions. In terms of the Republican Party, the combination of a solid Black vote for Democrats in combination with overwhelming Black support for unions and the teachers' unions as probably the most effective, certainly on election day, in terms of unions, force. And also, until rather recently, teachers as the most liked workforce in the country, better liked certainly than cops. All of that created a really big problem for the Republicans, and that's what we're talking about is for big capital. So they agonized over how to drive a wedge between what they consider to be the two pillars of the Democratic Party. That is labor, but most specifically teachers' unions and the Black community. Knowing of the Black mantra that education is everything, they saw an opening there. And they decided that since, despite the fact that Black folks held education in such high esteem, they knew that Black folks knew that they were not getting proper public education. And so that became the wedge. And this is where first the so-called movement, totally astroturf movement, for Black support for private school vouchers began, and was later expanded into the much more effective and politically attractive charter school so-called movement. When we use the term movement, it should always be in quotes because both of these issues were heavily funded by corporations. A key person in this whole development of Black support for privatization of education, something that is antithetical to Black history, is Cory Booker. Cory Booker was associated, in fact, he ran a private school, Education for Excellence, or Excellence in Education, in Newark, New Jersey. And as such, he was joined at the hip with the most right-wing Republicans in the state. And so when corporate think tanks decided that they were going to create out of whole cloth a movement, or the appearance of a movement among Black people for private school vouchers and later for charterization, they called a conference in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a whole bunch of Black opportunists, including most notably Cory Booker, came together and they formed the Black Alliance for Excellence in Education, Black Alliance for Educational Options. It was funded immediately with several $1 million, and finally, after only a couple of years, became funded publicly, that is, with federal funds by the Bush administration. And that initiative became one of two main planks of the Republican Party in the early 2000s. That is, the two things that the Bush administration was offering Black people were charterization and vouchers for private schools and faith-based initiatives, which basically means handing out money to Black preachers, a bribery campaign. That was the Republican outreach to Black America under George Bush. But since this was actually a corporate campaign, it wasn't so much Republican as a corporate effort to undermine a long-standing coalition between Black people and unions, and specifically teachers unions. The corporate side, which is now by far the dominant side of the Democratic Party, quickly picked up on it. And they were, in fact, more efficient than the Republicans were in seeing that charter schools was really the way to go if you want to privatize the largest number of classrooms in the shortest amount of time and create the perfect model for corporations, for hedge funders and other private investors, where the whole project is financed by public dollars, but private companies which take no risk can reap all of the projects. And so it was mainstreamed by Democrats. And the greatest proponent of charterization as a method of privatization is now Barack Obama, which has further complicated any resistance to charterization, and as the teachers union in Chicago found out. They found that they had to actually get down in the streets and unite with neighborhoods and talk about the actual effects of these new structures with community people, rather than just broadcast their own line, which was seen by this time as self-serving, in order to gain any traction in this age of Obama, when there was and still is such reluctance among Black people to oppose an initiative that is pushed so hard by this president. And I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah. Telling me something, a little something that I knew about this subject.
Yeah. It's a comment, and I guess the question will come out of it. But you know, you talked about the Black leadership class, and I followed Black agenda for a long time. So I agree with that analysis insofar as appearance. But when I think about this myself, as a part of a larger question, like why is there no Black movement today? And I think about the Black leadership class, and sometimes people don't do things because they're trying to sell people out per se. It's because they think that that's the right thing to do. It's like, for example, I sat in this chair today when I came in today, and I sat in this chair knowing that it would hold me up. But then if the chair breaks apart, like I'm shocked by it, right? And so I think about that in the context of, racial things happen to Black people, but we don't ever seem to go beyond just rallying, marching, and talking. And so it seems like to me that there is some type of either ideological or epistemological disconnect about what is happening and how we react to that. So I guess maybe I can.
Yeah, there is a deeper underlying problem that facilitates the machinations of those consciously greedy and self-serving members of the Black leadership class. There is a more fundamental problem. There are two rivers of thought in Black American politics that I maintain have existed ever since there's been something that could be described as Black American politics. Two tendencies. One is self-determinationist, and that, of course, is the trend that wants Black folks to get the ability to shape a world that is worthy of Black people, regardless of what other folks might think. And the other is what I call representationist. And that train of thought measures progress in how well Black folks are represented in the existing social economic structure. So it counts, simplistic about it, it counts Black places and high places without any consideration about the nature of those high places, what gets done in those high places, etc. So all is well if Blacks, as 13% of the population, have 13% of all the positions on boards and in legislatures and I guess in movies and Academy Awards and such, because from the representationist viewpoint, that is what progress is all about, that we are represented. From the self-determinationist standpoint, it's a different kind of measurement. And it's not as if there is an army of representationists over here and an army of self-determinationists over there. That has never existed, does not exist, and never will exist. Actually, these two rivers of thought, these two tendencies coexist or exist in conflict in every Black mind. And so people are pushed and pulled. And so as a self-determinationist, I still get misty-eyed when I see a Black person attain a position that no Black person has ever attained before, because there is that representationist strain working in my mind as well. So that's a constant push and pull in Black politics. And it does give a common bed or basis of political support for those Black leadership class people who quite consciously carve out places for themselves and quite consciously exclude the rest of the race, who quite consciously vote 80% to continue the Pentagon's funding transfers of weapons. That is quite calculated, right? But the tendency to support these evildoers, the tendency to not punish them, these high Black faces in high places who we're supposed to be proud of, is also quite strong, and it constrains us. And that's why it's so necessary to talk about the necessity of Black internal struggle, because the push and pull of these two tendencies and their seeming permanence in our heads actually serves those malefactors, those bad actors in our community, and we have to actively struggle against them. And often, quite often, it is painful, but it's not as painful as continuing the status quo.
I'm trying to keep up with you were trying to describe the very powerful points. I don't know if you can maybe just do that again, the self-determination is kind of missed it. Just trying to see how that contrasts with the institutions. And also maybe one of the sequences that you mentioned that you're talking about, you're thinking about Washington was kind of involved in some
But a self-determination would put an issue to black folks and would determine the validity of a proposition based upon how black folks viewed it. But for example, I have long thought that we should, as we approach electoral politics, make it clear whether a candidate who wins elected office was elected by black people or not by black people. That there is a real distinction, and it's quite important. When Cynthia McKinney, for example, was voted out of a congressional seat the first time in 2002, it became part of the narrative, a narrative that came long before that election, by the corporate media as a reflection of the narrative that the ruling class was putting out, that black folks would become less leftist, less radical, more conservative as the black middle class grew. That was taken, that was the received wisdom. Since Cynthia McKinney, I'm trying to get more specific here in my explanation. Since Cynthia McKinney was elected from the second most affluent black county in the United States, right behind PG County in Virginia, then it was, according to this theory, then this black population was by definition more conservative than other black folks because they were more affluent, and they should be rejecting the quote old style civil rights style politics of a previous era. So Cynthia McKinney's loss of that election was cracked up as being the result of the rightness of that formula, that she was too left for black people. Well, we did at Black Agenda, Black Commentator, we did a survey and we found that as far as we could determine, Cynthia McKinney won almost 80% of the black vote. And a white guy, sociologist, in Atlanta, one who was favored by the Atlanta Constitution, did his own survey, and he found that Cynthia McKinney won 83% of the black vote in her district. So Cynthia McKinney won the black election hands down, and you can't make a statement about black public opinion, therefore, based upon which black person won that seat. The person who won that seat was the white, was the black person favored by white people. The Democratic Party, as a matter of policy, favors breaking up super black districts. In fact, they'd rather have no majority black districts at all. They would rather see black folks just digits in a larger, spread around as far as possible to create the Democratic majorities in as many places as possible, which of course is a negation of black political opinion and using black folks as just digits for the benefit of the Democratic Party. And it automatically produces black politicians like Nutter. And we could go on down the list who are really not representative of black political thought. So a self-determinationist, to get to your point, a self-determinationist does not recognize the Nutters and such as being expressions of black political will. A representationist would count the number of black mayors and be quite satisfied that there is another there. Okay?
So basically, self-determination is what I'm getting to do. Well, it more than what I can be. Appeal to the masses that for you think the representation is more, how can I say, sad.
The representationist ideology, if you can call it an ideology, train of thought, certainly is more advantageous to a class that is trying to carve out special modalities of upward mobility for itself than a self-determinationist train of thought. Yeah.
Would you consider the Black Caucus representative based on the established and for what I can see, just it really did anything to the message
I think one of the things that I tried to do with those examples is to show that in their behavior, they certainly do not vote in accordance, not in accordance with black interests, which is quite clear, absolutely clear that they vote on Pentagon transfers, but they don't vote in accordance with black public opinion. Black America has, ever since there have been polls of black public opinion, been the most anti-war, the most opposed to U.S. military adventures of any group in the United States. And for the Congressional Black Caucus, half of it to vote not only for a continuing war, but for a continuing war on Africa is just absolutely inconsistent with black public opinion. So obviously they are motivated by other people's interests for which they are rewarded.
So they're more safe.
But again, I said before that there was no army of self-determinationists to our left and an army of representationists to our right who are easily definable. Those tendencies exist in all of our heads. You can go ahead, my brother.
So that goes back to what W.E.B. Du Bois has always talked about, the double consciousness that we have.
I think so too, and I wanted to brush back past Dr. Monteiro, and I was afraid I'd get shot down and humiliated. But I've always thought, since I've had this duality about representationism and self-determinationism, that there was a connection to the two. Yeah.
I would say on all issues having to do with black people, we all, and as a group, we have this two-sidedness, this doubleness, this double consciousness, and this ambiguity. And in some ways, I would say that it is a survivalist proclivity, a predisposition. Even with a Booker T. Washington, it was not Booker T. Washington who put the end of Reconstruction. It was the alliance of Northern Republicans and philanthropists and manufacturers with the new Southern ruling class that came, as Du Bois pointed out, from the poor whites. So how do you survive when the white nation is turned completely against you, at least for Booker T. Washington? For ordinary black people, the question of survival. You look at this last election, in previous elections, polls show that 70% of white Protestant men vote Republican. 60-some% of all white people vote Republican. For most black people, the white vote, in its majority, is an anti-black vote. And it's a real dilemma in the era of Obama with the collapse of leadership of the type that we had in the civil rights period. For example, Martin Luther King, who by 1967 had broken with Lyndon Johnson, probably, would be considered a far leftist in the Democratic Party today. King broke with him over the question of war and peace and poverty. He said that war is the enemy of the poor, and that and this is, I guess what he was saying to black folk is the survivalist tendency. How will we survive in this hostile white environment? For King, the answer was in constant struggle, etc. That's the way I would put it. And I agree with you. I don't want to talk to. I agree with you completely. The Democratic Party of 2014 is not the Democratic Party even of 1944. I like to bring this up. That convention where, and this is probably a turning point in American politics, where 3 years into World War II, Roosevelt is sick, would die soon, and the Democratic Party meets in a convention. They have to decide who would be the vice presidential candidate. They had a choice between Harry Truman, a Southern conservative Democrat, and Henry Wallace, a progressive Democrat. I'm of the opinion that it is possible that the history of American politics may have been very different had Henry Wallace been chosen, because with the death of Franklin Roosevelt, he would have become the president. That doesn't say all the problems would have been solved. And once you get this Harry Truman presidency and the misleadership class of the NAACP of that time enters into an alliance, a Cold War alliance with Truman for, quote, civil rights. But
there was always a tendency among historians and among journalists who think that they're historians to take history as being inevitable, and then they think backward as to why it was inevitable. I understand that the apology for Booker T is that it was a survival imperative. If we don't surrender, they're going to kill all of us. Well, lots of people did not surrender, and lots of people did get killed. But during the next 60 damn years, it is difficult for me to believe, just looking at what did happen once we did stand up, it is difficult for me to believe that history in the South would have been the same if the Northern and Southern white capital had not found such a skilled apologist as they did in Booker T. Washington, one who would affirm the inevitability of Jim Crow and actively marginalize those who did not want to do so. I don't accept history as it has occurred as having been inevitable. And if it was not inevitable, then the deaths that occurred because of a lack of resistance to the terror can really be cracked up to those who accepted the surrender.
I think I can agree with that. Except, if I might just say one small thing, the psychological impact upon ordinary black folk in particular of the appearance of a white majority that is viscerally hostile to black progress, you see what I'm saying, creates trepidation. And I think that, you know, about, well, do we go too
White
aggressive?
folk is scary,
Yeah, it's a scary, and it is. I mean, if you think about it, these are scary times. I would say, and I agree with you, retreat and submission is not the answer. But saying that it's not the answer does not mitigate the fact that still in the minds of people, you know, there is this sense that if we go too far, they're going to kill us all. But that, you know, that's what I.
Well,
yeah, and that's why in the 60s, truth be told, most black folks did not participate actively in the social transformation.
right.
And would have told you, who did tell us, you remember, it might get us killed.
That's right.
So, well, yeah, that's a concept.
You know, just hearing the comments, I think one of the things that happened to us, when I say us, I'm talking about those who are entrenched in this war against what's happening to our folks, is that our people get so disillusioned with the thing. When we look at another or President Obama, we put people in positions and think that that's enough. And then when we see that it's not enough, instead of us coming together, like right now, all the stuff that happened last night, we don't have no time to get disillusioned about last night. It's a time about coming together to make sure we put up a fort that's going to keep us from being demolished. Because if we look around with what's happening with every institution, our educational institution, the economic institution, the political and social institution, it's all about crushing us, and we get delusioned with being crushed instead of getting strong enough to say it ain't happening.
And you know, sometimes we believe we are being crushed when it's not us being crushed.
Thank you.
Because you were referring to last night. You know, this is a very unique time in my 65 years. I've never experienced a time when one or the other, most Democrats mostly, had not even the semblance of a program to offer black people. Actually, to offer anybody, but certainly black people. Nothing, not even a whispering of one. President Obama has only My Brother's Keeper, which is not even a government program. It is an appeal to corporate philanthropy. It's a big. It's not a program. It doesn't really have anything to do with government, except that government will match whatever self-serving program philanthropically corporations come up with, which means it's a big from them and then a gift to them, but nothing, and that is unique. I have never seen anything like that, and I'm confident it's never existed. What do the Republicans have? They have race. They are the white man's party, so they have a built-in appeal. But the Democrats objectively don't have any appeal except that they are not the Republicans. So, and that's it. So who got crushed? Who got crushed last night? A party that doesn't offer us anything got crushed. Our lesson ought to be, and not just from what happened last night, but what's been happening, is that we're going to continue not only to experience a situation in which nobody offers us a program or listens to one that we might propose, But the same people who don't offer us a program, they get crushed and they want us to cry when it happens. I can't imagine a description of passivity more than that. So if we're crying and that's all we're doing, is because we're not trying to actually organize around principles and around actual needs, and doing it in a self-determinationist way that is not checking to see if the participants in the meeting are vouched for by corporate media or whatever, but that they actually are black folks who want to do something, and therefore eligible to speak. You know, so we have to change the way we organize, the way we who we respect as leaders, and that was, you know, my intent with the talk today. However, ineffective, is to say if we invite into our council folks based upon how much media play they have gotten, how they have been accepted by other people, as if that credentializes them. Every time we do that, we weaken ourselves, and we multiply the power of our presence. And we do that ourselves when we invite them into our councils. And if you invite Sharpton, entertaining King Rat.
A moment ago, you mentioned the inevitability of history as what is perceived, as we all think history is inevitable, so these policies work. And you know, it's presented there as an almost like rightist kind of status quo thing. But I just think it's also very interesting that that's a very common line in the left. Marxists have always said.
Vulgar Marxism. Yes.
There you go. See, that's what we're talking about. Like a left that always says history will have an answer, and the answer is utopia. You know, the utopianist left is always going to be kind of held back, that their stance on inevitability is really appropriating that of like the status quo. Does that make sense? And if so, I wonder if
well, it's not a real dialectical materialist approach. That's why it's vulgar. And it does not see people as objective forces and who have agency within the parameters that are presented by history.
You mentioned that the memo in Kenya put thousands of African loyalists to the bridge.
Yeah, the estimate is 15,000.
Okay. So the Black misleadership class in this country is, I mean, they obviously don't comprise the majority of men given that sentence. They're just very much like, they're very much in minority. So do you think anything like that can happen?
I didn't actually mean that we go out and kill 10 or 15,000.
It would have to be there.
Of them. I meant that we have to wade through them, that they are guardians of the status quo. They feel an investment in, and then that their status is all linked up with the status quo. So they present themselves to stop you. That's what Al Sharpton does. But that's what a whole lot of folks who are not as prominent as Al Sharpton do. That's what everybody, not everyone, but almost all of those people who are professional electoral politicians do. Certainly once they get office, very few mayors would tolerate, if they had their brothers, a movement, an active movement in their city, because it complicates his rule. He only wants people moving to the polls every election day. Otherwise, he wants complacency, just so that he can pack the zoning boards and and all the other things that smoothly operate to the benefit of the developers and whoever he answers to. So he doesn't want a movement gumming up the works. So you have to wade through him. I didn't say you had to kill him. I didn't say you had to kill him. Some people do need killing, but I don't name any names nowadays.
Yes. I want to ask you a question about Africa. You know, it's like, you know, it's like aid to Africa with a gun to your head. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, AFRICOM, although it has its predecessors, it's not like the United States just jumped up in 2008 and began the invasion of Africa. But AFRICOM's formal life is basically coterminous with President Obama. So when we talk about AFRICOM, we essentially are talking about Obama's term. In that period, the United States has essentially subverted, made dependent, and made disloyal to their own countries the militaries of the vast majority of African countries. There are only 3 countries on the continent that do not have some kind of obligatory relationship with AFRICOM. And those are Zimbabwe, Eritrea, which most people don't know where it is, and a piece of Sudan that still exists. And naturally, because of that, those 3 countries have bullseyes on their back, because not to join into a relationship with AFRICOM is to become an enemy of AFRICOM, an enemy of the United States. Folks don't understand AFRICOM's mission. It's a very sophisticated mission. It's not difficult to understand, but it goes against the grain of our understanding of colonialism or what the recolonization of Africa is supposed to look at. The recolonization of Africa does not look like the old colonization of Africa, because the world has changed and the imperialists have lots of factors to contend with that they didn't have before. The United States does not have a formal headquarters for AFRICOM in Africa because it does not really want one or need one. It actually does have what for all intents and purposes is a headquarters in Djibouti, which is a little wedge of land between Eritrea and Somalia. Eritrea is essentially a military base of the French first, and now of the French and the Americans. And most large-scale AFRICOM operations actually are coordinated out of Djibouti. So there is a headquarters, but they don't call it that because they don't want to mess with people's nationalist aspirations or sensitivities. But more importantly, the purpose of AFRICOM is not to place autonomous U.S. bases full of U.S. troops and U.S. Gear that people that can be isolated politically and made focuses of anti-U.S. organizing in the country. The purpose of AFRICOM is to integrate to the extent possible, as deeply as possible, U.S. military personnel on African military bases, so that U.S. officers go to the officers' club on the Kenyan military base, or the Mali military base, and they drink with and they fraternize with Kenyan and Mali officers. It all comes under the U.S. military doctrine of officer to officer, in which they actively encourage fraternization, general to general, captain to captain, and even down to the non-commissioned officer rank, sergeant to sergeant, so that the United States is talking to, through its military,
Right.
the entire militaries of almost every African country. It is an act, an act of self-defense, of defense of the integrity of your armed forces as well as your territory, but the integrity of your armed forces not to join AFRICOM, because their intention is to fraternize with and subvert the loyalty of your own people. Because not just of colonialism, but U.S. structural adjustment policies for decades in Africa and every place else in what we used to call the Third World. Africa, most countries in Africa have nothing that could pass muster as a public health service. Because structural adjustment says you won't get lines of credit or any foreign investment unless you pare down your public sector to the bone. And only so will you be allowed lines of credit and get foreign investment. And that means the most essential public sector, especially for countries in the least developed world, that's public health. And you don't have one. And that's why Liberia and Guinea have only one doctor for every 100,000 people. And Sierra Leone has only two. That is no public health service at all. Haiti, the closest thing to a public health service in Haiti is the Cubans. Well, the United States keeps on trying to get Haiti to kick out. But even their puppet administrators in Haiti don't want to kick out the Cubans because otherwise there'd be no doctors at all. You see. We have to look at this AFRICOM and the services that it provides in a very sinister way. So although the United States, as well as the French, all of them, have done everything they can to make sure that no adequate public health services arise in Africa, if they can help it, AFRICOM brags that it provides free health care to hundreds of thousands of African military families, not just soldiers, not just the officers, but African military families. It is buying the loyalty of African militaries so that it creates a situation in which even a military government like Museveni in Uganda, or Kagame, a government with roots in military takeovers, they have to shiver at night, tremble, wondering what their officers are saying to the American officers drunk at the officer club, that anybody can be coup d'etat in there because of the actual normal modus operandi of Africa. Why do they do that? Well, the United States knows, it's recognized for a long time that it's not going to compete in terms of trade in Africa or eventually anyplace else with the emerging economic powers. And that's not just China, but the BRIC countries, especially Brazil and India, etc. And there's no hope of that happening. And really, they don't care because Wall Street controls the United States. Wall Street is the hegemon, and they don't make money by making things. They profit from manipulating markets and speculation, and it's all enforced at the point of agreement, which is the main thing. So they're not worried about trade with Africa, but they are worried about African states' geopolitical position. Who are they going to support in world forums? And as long as AFRICOM is there with this insidious presence within the militaries, that's the U.S., that represents the U.S. ability to kick the Chinese out if they so choose.
That's right.
It's really not in their interest to do so. But if they so choose, if they pitch a fit, if they, because they are going crazy in their decline, if they so choose, they can put tremendous pressures on the Chinese. That is, there is a price for the Chinese to pay, and it can be inflicted not at the streets of Formosa, but in South Sudan.
Right.
You see. So it's complex, but once you understand it, it's more understandable.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I want to thank Glenn Ford again for coming out and giving us that amazing lecture and that great question and answer session. I want to thank everyone for coming out here again tonight to hear our lecture series. Next week, we're going to have Professor Joe Schwartz here. He's going to be talking about, he's political science professor here at Temple. We're going to talk about political economy and Dubois and Marx and all of these things that we've been discussing. I also want to make an announcement about something that's going on currently. Everybody knows about what's happening in Ferguson now at the moment and how the grand jury verdict is imminent and it can come at any time. We have no idea when it's going to come, but we know it's coming soon. And all reports are indicating that it's going to come back with a not guilty verdict, which is what many of us have been expecting from the beginning. So some of us here at Temple and at other places, we're getting ready to organize now around this verdict. And we are planning to have concurrent rallies